Cool. Stand up and keep your hands where I can see them.
What is this about?
Complaint of disorderly behavior. Stand up.
Who made the complaint?
That's not your concern right now. Stand up.
So, you want to detain me?
Yes, while I figure this out.
Figure out what?
Man, this can go easy if you just cooperate.
Easy for who?
Enough. Stand up. I work for the federal...
What happens when street cops try to embarrass the exact kind of person who knows every rule they're supposed to follow? This was the kind of stop that looked bad in real time and somehow got worse every minute after that. 2 patrol officers walked into a downtown lunch spot, picked the wrong woman, turned a weak call into a public arrest, and spent the next 10 minutes building the lawsuit that would gut their careers. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories where power trips crash into facts, hit like and subscribe, because this one went all the way from a lunch table to a $20 million settlement. The woman at the center of it was Dana Mercer, 41, federal prosecutor, calm voice, sharp memory, zero interest in performing fear for men who confused a badge with unlimited authority. She wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, didn't need to be. By the time those officers put hands on her, they were already in deeper trouble than they understood. It started in a business district restaurant a few blocks from the federal courthouse. Lunch rush, lawyers, staffers, consultants, people on tight schedules, eating fast and checking phones. Normal place. Polished, expensive. Quiet enough that everybody noticed when police energy entered the room. Dana had taken a corner table on the patio. She was between hearings. Her briefcase was open beside her chair. A legal pad sat next to her plate. She'd been reviewing notes and answering a work call. That was it. No scene, no disturbance, no threat. Just a black woman in a suit speaking firmly into a phone and flipping through case papers in a place where half the room probably did the same thing every day. Somebody called it in anyway. Not because of a crime. Because she looked suspicious to the kind of person who sees confidence and starts inventing danger around it. Dispatch sent the call as a possible disturbance involving a woman refusing to leave. That was the first problem. The restaurant manager hadn't asked Donna to leave. No employee had reported a conflict. Nobody said she threatened anyone. By the time officers Brett Harlan and Luis Kessler arrived, they weren't responding to facts. They were responding to a vibe. And officers who start with vibes usually end with paperwork they can't defend. Harlan went first. That fit his pattern. He liked taking over scenes fast, talking hard, making people react to him. He stepped onto the patio and locked onto Dana, like he'd already chosen the ending. Kessler stayed half a step behind, doing what weak partners do in moments like that, watching a bad decision form and deciding not to interrupt it. Harlan told Dana to stand up and keep her hands visible. She looked at him, stayed seated, and asked what this was about. That should have slowed everything down. A competent officer would have explained the complaint, checked with staff, figured out whether there was even a lawful basis to detain her. That didn't happen. Harlan treated the question itself like disrespect. He told her again to stand up. He added that she was being detained while they investigated. Investigated what? That was the obvious question. Dana asked it. He didn't answer it cleanly because he didn't have a clean answer. He mentioned a complaint. He mentioned disorderly behavior. Then he told her to produce identification. Now the whole patio was watching. Dana didn't refuse in the dramatic way officers later claimed in their reports. She did something worse for them. She stayed controlled. She asked whether she was free to leave. She asked what specific crime he believed had occurred. She told him her identification was in her bag and said she was not consenting to any search of it without a lawful basis. That was when Harlan made the stop personal. He leaned in, changed his tone, made it clear this wasn't about solving anything. He wanted submission. Quick, public, obvious. He wanted her on her feet, compliant, smaller than him in front of a room full of strangers. Dana didn't give him that, and officers like Harlan always take that badly. Kessler tried a softer version of the same thing. He told her this could all be easy if she just cooperated. That line shows up in a lot of bad police encounters. It sounds reasonable. It isn't. What it really means is Stop asking for your rights and let us control the scene. Dana told him again that she was willing to identify herself, but she wanted to know the legal basis for the detention first. Perfectly fair. Actually smarter than most people manage under pressure. She also told them she worked for the federal government. Harlan smirked at that. Big mistake. He told her everybody claimed to be important when police showed up. He said titles didn't matter on his scene. That little phrase came back later like a hammer, because now he'd said the quiet part out loud. He wasn't checking facts. He was punishing resistance. The restaurant manager, Maya Chen, came out by then. She tried to explain that Dana had done nothing wrong and that nobody from the restaurant had asked for police intervention. Harlan cut her off. Bad move again. He didn't want information. He wanted control of the narrative before facts could ruin it. One customer had already started recording, then another, then another. You could feel the whole thing shift. People stopped pretending this was normal. They could see the officers weren't calming a problem. They were creating one. Dana reached slowly toward her bag and said she was retrieving identification. Harlan grabbed her wrist. That was the moment the stop crossed into a real legal disaster. He later claimed officer safety. Officers always run to that when the video looks ugly. But Bodycam and witness footage told a cleaner story. She'd moved slowly. She'd announced what she was doing. She was seated. No threat indicators, no weapon claim, no aggressive movement. He just didn't like that she was still acting like an equal participant in the encounter instead of a subject. Dana pulled her arm back and told him not to touch her without cause. Harlan took that as resistance, or pretended to. Hard to tell with men like that. Sometimes they know exactly what they're doing. Sometimes ego blinds them so fast they start believing their own misconduct in real time. He ordered her up from the chair. Kessler moved in. Between them, they pulled her to her feet while she kept saying she was not resisting and wanted a supervisor. People on the patio started objecting. Maya said again there had been no disturbance. One man identified himself as an attorney and told the officers they were making a mistake. Harlan snapped at him to stay out of it. That's another thing officers with fragile authority never understand. Public scenes don't stay private just because they want them to. Once you start dragging a professional woman out of a chair in the middle of lunch, everybody becomes a witness. They turned her, cuffed her, and walked her through the restaurant. That part did the damage nobody at City Hall could later undo. A federal prosecutor, in handcuffs, in front of courthouse staff, private attorneys, restaurant employees, and a row of raised phones. Humiliation like that doesn't disappear because a department writes a defensive report later. It settles into memory, into video, into civil claims, into juries. Outside, Harlan searched her bag. No warrant, no consent, no actual foundation strong enough to survive serious review. He found the identification almost immediately. Federal credentials, not a bluff, not a game. The exact thing she'd been telling them from the start. Kessler saw it first, and that was the first crack. His posture changed. Small but visible. He looked at Harlan, then at the credential, then back at Dana, like his brain had finally caught up to the scene. This wasn't some vague street stop with no consequences. They had just handcuffed a federal prosecutor after ignoring staff, ignoring witnesses, ignoring her explanation, and putting their hands on her without a clean legal basis. A smart officer would have ended it right there. Uncuff. Apologize. Call a supervisor. Start damage control. Harlan wasn't smart in the moments that mattered. He doubled down. He said credentials could be fake. Said they were taking her in until everything checked out. That was pure ego. Desperate ego. The kind that turns one bad choice into 5 because the man making them cannot stand the idea of backing up in front of a crowd. By the time Sergeant Nolan Pike arrived, the body cams had already captured enough to sink half a defense. Pike got a fast version from Harlan, not an honest one. Complaint, non-compliance, possible interference, Suspicious behavior. The usual pile of vague words officers use when the actual facts don't help them. Dana, still cuffed, gave Pike the simple version. She'd been eating lunch. She'd asked for the basis of the stop. She'd offered identification from her bag. Harlan grabbed her, cuffed her, searched the bag, and ignored her federal credentials when he found them. Pike had a choice right there. Be a supervisor or be a shield. He chose shield. He told the officers to transport her. Again, bad move. Huge one? Because now this wasn't one patrol officer losing control. This was a chain of command failure. One ego had become three. And here was the part none of them understood yet. Dana Mercer didn't need to win the argument on the sidewalk. That part was over. She just needed them to keep making decisions on camera. Every extra minute helped her. Every order. Every contradiction. Every witness they brushed aside. They thought they were tightening control. Really, they were writing exhibits. As they put her in the back of the cruiser, Dana stopped trying to convince them. That phase had passed. She shifted to memory, names, badge numbers, sequence, exact language. Timestamps, who interrupted whom, who searched what, who ignored the restaurant manager, who saw the credentials and kept going. That's what made the whole thing deadly for the department later. She wasn't panicking. She was preserving. By the time the cruiser pulled away from the restaurant, Maya had already saved the security footage. 2 attorneys had exchanged numbers with witnesses. One courthouse employee had recognized Dana and started making calls. Inside the car, Kessler sat in silence. Harlan kept performing certainty. Pike told dispatch they were bringing in a detainee for identification verification. A detainee, not an arrestee. Not a suspect tied to a clear offense. Just a person they'd humiliated in public because none of them had the discipline to stop. In downtown, a few blocks from the federal courthouse, the first calls were already reaching people with enough authority to make this a career-ending afternoon. The ride to the precinct was the last stretch where those officers still thought they could control the story. That ended the second Dana got through booking. The desk staff recognized the name before Harlan could finish dressing up the arrest. Not because federal prosecutors were celebrities, because downtown systems overlap. Courthouse people know each other. Agency names travel fast. Credentials matter. And once one booking officer saw who she was, the room changed, not in a dramatic movie way, in the real way. People got quieter. Screens got checked twice. Somebody stopped treating the paperwork like routine. Somebody else made a call they probably wished they didn't have to make. Harlan kept pushing the same version. Disorderly conduct. Failure to comply. Suspicious behavior. Interference with an investigation. That stack of vague garbage had carried him through plenty of street stops before. It didn't work here because Dana knew exactly how weak each label was. She didn't argue like a civilian trying to get out of trouble. She corrected the record like a lawyer building one. She stated the timeline. She identified the lack of probable cause. She flagged the unlawful bag search. She pointed out that the restaurant manager had contradicted the call basis on scene. She noted that the officers found valid federal credentials and kept her in cuffs anyway. Then she asked for their names again, the supervisor's name again, and the Bodycam preservation process. That last part hit hard. Now, the booking people knew what kind of problem had landed on their desk. This wasn't a messy arrest they could clean up with a disorderly citation and a shrug. This was a constitutional claim with witnesses, surveillance, and a plaintiff who understood discovery better than the city attorneys who would later inherit it. Within 30 minutes, phone traffic started moving above the station level. A supervisor from Dana's office called, then another. Then someone from Federal Protective Services started asking why a federal prosecutor had been cuffed on a lunch break over a call nobody could clearly explain. That's when the panic started breaking through the swagger. Kessler felt it first. He stopped talking much, stopped making eye contact, stopped acting like the stop had been clean. People like him always collapse inward when the cover story starts slipping. He'd gone along with Harlan on the sidewalk because that was easy. At the station with forms, names, and internal recordings in play, it didn't feel easy anymore. Harlan went the other way. He got louder, more rigid, more convinced that forceful repetition could turn weak facts into strong ones. It couldn't. It just made him look worse. Pike tried to split the difference. He started talking about mistaken identity and officer caution. That didn't help either. The officers hadn't made a reasonable mistake and then corrected it. They'd ignored correction after correction. That's what killed them later. One bad assumption can sometimes survive review. Doubling down after the facts arrive usually can't. Dana was released that evening. No charges, no coherent explanation, no real apology. Just a rushed exit built around damage control. That made things worse. Always does. Because when a department cuffs someone in public, drags them through booking, then quietly lets them go with nothing, it confirms exactly what the plaintiff's lawyer wants a jury to hear. They had power. They used it badly, then they ran out of nerve. Dana didn't go home and try to forget it. She got organized. By that night, the preservation letters were drafted, restaurant footage, body cam files, dash cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, booking video, internal radio traffic, incident reports, supplemental reports, complaint history, training records, supervisory review trail. She and the lawyers who circled around her moved fast because experienced people know departments lose memory when evidence gets expensive. The next morning, the first local story hit. A federal prosecutor had been arrested at lunch after questioning officers about the legal basis for her detention. Witnesses said the restaurant had never asked police to remove her. Video showed officers searching her bag, finding credentials, and still hauling her away. That story exploded because it had everything: public humiliation, weak police logic, clean video, a powerful profession on the receiving end of street-level arrogance. And underneath all that, the question every normal person asks in a case like this: if they did this to someone who knew the law cold, what did they do to everybody else? Then other names started surfacing. A civil rights group dug into complaint records and found Harlan had already collected a reputation inside the department. Not enough to end his career. Enough to show a pattern. Aggressive stops. Shaky justifications. Citizen complaints that went nowhere. Supervisors smoothing rough edges instead of addressing the core problem. Same old story. A guy keeps pushing because the system keeps teaching him he can. That turned Dana's case from a bad arrest into a city problem. The lawsuit landed 6 months later, and it was brutal. Not loud, not theatrical, just precise. False arrest, unlawful detention, unlawful search, retaliatory escalation, failure to intervene, supervisory liability, municipal liability tied to ignored warning signs, state law claims on top, emotional distress, reputational harm, professional harm, violation after violation lined up in order. The city tried the usual first move. It asked for patience, promised review, and acted like facts were still developing. That posture lasted until discovery started. Then the wheels came off. Maya Chen gave a clean statement and never wavered. She said Dana had been calm, said the restaurant had not called for removal, said she personally told officers there was no disturbance. That alone hurt them. Then the witness videos came in. Same problem. Dana stayed seated, announced her movement toward the bag, asked basic legal questions. Harlan escalated anyway. Then came the body cams. That was the funeral. Not because body cam always tells the whole truth. It doesn't. Angles miss things. Audio drops. Officers forget to position themselves honestly. But in this case, the recordings were bad enough. You could hear the impatience. You could hear the dismissal when Dana identified herself. You could hear the shift from investigation to punishment. At one point, Harlan practically admitted the stop had become a contest over compliance. That line got replayed in depositions until even the city's lawyers stopped pretending it had an innocent meaning. Kessler sank during deposition. He tried to say Dana made sudden movements. Video undercut that. He tried to say they feared for safety. The scene undercut that. He tried to say they only learned her identity later. The bag search undercut that. Then the lawyers walked him through timestamps, frame by frame. By the end, he looked like what he was, a man who tied himself to a bad officer and discovered too late that loyalty is expensive when the video works. Pike did no better. He claimed he relied on his officers. Fair enough up to a point. Then the plaintiff's team asked why he transported anyway, after hearing the restaurant manager contradict the call basis, and after learning valid federal credentials had already been found. He had no good answer. Supervisors hate that moment. Rank stops helping. It becomes obvious they weren't managing risk. They were protecting their own. The city attorney's office changed tone after that. Quietly at first, then completely. Because by then they'd also reviewed internal material the public hadn't seen yet. Prior complaints against Harlan. Intervention chances that went nowhere. Weak supervisory notes. Training acknowledgments that contradicted how the officers behaved. The city could no longer sell this as a split-second misunderstanding. It looked exactly like what it was. A preventable abuse of authority carried out by officers who thought nobody in the moment could hold them to the law. Settlement talks got serious once the damages picture fully opened up. And the damages were big. Bigger than people think in these cases. Dana wasn't just embarrassed for 5 minutes on a sidewalk. She was handcuffed in front of legal peers, dragged through a station, treated like a liar after presenting real credentials, and forced into a fight over her professional reputation by people who had no lawful reason to start it. Add the constitutional claims, the public record, the city exposure on supervision, and the pattern evidence. 20 million stopped sounding crazy. It started sounding like the number the city had to pay to avoid a worse number later. When the settlement finally hit, it landed like a bomb in City Hall. $20 million. No spin could fix that. Taxpayers understood it immediately. This wasn't an accident bill. This was an ego bill, a badge bill, a nobody told them no bill. Then the career started ending. Harlan was terminated first. The department couldn't carry him after the Bodycam review, the report inconsistencies, and the deposition record. His certification review followed. Then a referral for criminal evaluation tied to false statements and misconduct in office. Whether prosecutors wanted that fight or not, his policing life was done. No decent department was touching him after that file. Kessler resigned before the final discipline hearing. That saved him a public firing, not his reputation. Everybody knew why he left. He'd had several chances to stop the train and chose cowardice every time. Pike lost rank, then lost the job entirely. A supervisor who ratifies nonsense on scene and then backs bad paperwork afterward becomes radioactive once a city writes a $20 million check. Nobody wants that man in command after that. The fallout kept moving upward. Command staff took heat for ignoring warning signs. The mayor got dragged into press conferences. The police chief had to answer why prior complaints didn't trigger meaningful intervention. That's the part departments hate most. One street stop turns into a microscope on the whole chain. And yes, policy changes followed. They always do when money gets that high. The city tightened detention standards, required clearer articulation before non-custodial encounters became forcible ones, expanded body cam preservation rules, forced supervisors to review retaliatory arrest indicators, added scenario training on lawful stops, citizen questioning, and professional identification verification. Useful changes. Also late. They usually are. Dana took the settlement, but she didn't turn into a public victory lap person. She went back to work. That felt more serious than a press tour. She let the records speak. Let the filing speak. Let the city's own signatures speak. People around her said she got quieter after it happened. Not weaker, sharper, less patient with institutional excuses. That tracks. Encounters like that change how someone sees the distance between the law on paper and the law on the street. The ugliest truth in the whole story sat right there in plain view. Dana got justice partly because she had status, knowledge, witnesses, and resources. She knew how to preserve evidence. She knew how to force accountability. She knew who to call and what to ask for. A lot of people don't. They get the same stop, the same humiliation, the same garbage report, and then they hit a wall. That's why this case mattered beyond one prosecutor and 3 bad cops. It showed the mechanism, not just the misconduct, the mechanism. 3 officers thought lunch was the easy part of their day. Instead, they walked into a public record they couldn't bully, a target who understood the rules better than they did, and a city payout big enough to make everybody finally pay attention. That's the story. So what would you have done in that situation? And have you ever seen someone with authority keep pushing just because they couldn't stand being questioned? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share the story with somebody who gets it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
What's in the bag?
A charger, a drink, gum.
You pay for it?
Yes, sir.
Receipt.
It's in my pocket.
Hey, don't reach.
You asked for it.
Hands where I can see them.
Okay, I paid for it. I was just trying to show you.
Why were you hanging around electronics?
I was picking the charger.
Why are you nervous?
Can I call my dad?
No, not yet.
Officer Ryan Haskell believed he controlled that parking lot. Then he detained a 13-year-old boy for a theft that never happened, ignored the receipt that would have ended the stop, and kept pushing after the facts were already against him. He did not know the boy was Evan Mercer, the son of Daniel Mercer, the incoming Metropolitan Police Chief. That mistake did not stay a routine field stop. It became the kind of case that can end a career. Tell me where you're watching from: city, state, or country. And if you like stories about abuse of authority getting exposed through facts, recordings, and accountability, like the video and subscribe. This started in a retail plaza in a large American city. There was a pharmacy, a coffee shop, a nail salon, and a dry cleaner. It was busy enough for witnesses and covered well enough with cameras that nobody should have felt safe cutting corners. Officers still did it there. Places like that made some of them careless because they assumed the scene would look calm from a distance. Evan Mercer was 13 years old. He was quiet, careful, and used to paying attention. He had been raised by a father who understood exactly how street encounters could turn bad. Daniel Mercer had not become Metropolitan Police Chief yet, but the appointment was public, and the transition had already started. He had told his son the basic rules more than once. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly. Do not argue in public with an officer. Do not make sudden movements. Let facts do the work. On that afternoon, Evan stopped at the pharmacy after school. He needed a phone charger. He also bought a drink and gum. He used self-checkout, paid, took the printed receipt, and put it in his pocket. There was nothing complicated about it. The problem started because a newer employee noticed him standing near the electronics rack for a little longer than most customers did. The employee mentioned it to the store manager, Priya Shah. She did what a competent manager was supposed to do. She checked the area and looked into the transaction record. She had not confirmed a theft. She had not identified missing merchandise. She was still checking when the call that reached police got simplified into something much looser and much more dangerous. A suspicious juvenile was possibly shoplifting. That kind of call leaves room for a bad officer to build his own story. Officer Ryan Haskell took the call. He had a reputation for aggressive retail stops and a habit of treating pressure like investigation. He liked fast compliance. He liked being the loudest person in a scene. He called himself proactive. Supervisors use more careful language because departments do that when they are not ready to admit the real issue. The real issue was simple. He often decided what happened before he had enough facts to say it. By the time Haskell arrived, Evan had already left the store and was crossing the lot with a pharmacy bag in one hand and a backpack over one shoulder. Haskell got out of the patrol car and stopped him before he reached the sidewalk. He asked what was in the bag. Evan answered him. He asked whether he had paid for the items. Evan said yes. He asked for the receipt. Evan said it was in his pocket and started to reach for it. Haskell immediately told him not to move so fast. That was the first point where the stop could still have been corrected easily. A reasonable officer would have let the boy explain, watched his hands, and verified the purchase. Haskell went the other way. He treated nervousness like guilt. He treated a normal movement toward a receipt like a threat or an excuse. Evan stopped moving and kept his hands visible. He said again that he had paid and that the receipt was in his pocket. Haskell did not slow down. He asked why Evan had been standing near the electronics section. He asked why he was alone. He asked what was in the backpack. He asked why he looked nervous. He kept stacking questions quickly, which is a common tactic when an officer wants control more than clarity. A young person gets rattled. The officer calls that evasive behavior. Then the officer uses the same pressure he created as proof that the stop was justified. Evan stayed respectful. He gave short answers. He did not raise his voice. None of that mattered because Haskell had already settled on the version he wanted. He saw a black boy, a charger, a backpack, and a possible theft call. He filled in the rest on his own. Priya Shah came out of the store when she realized police had stopped the same customer who had just checked out. She tried to explain that there was no confirmed theft. She told Haskell the purchase could be verified through the register. He cut her off and kept his attention on the boy. That decision hurt him later. He had already been offered the easiest way to verify the facts, and he rejected it. Evan again told him the receipt was in his pocket and tried to indicate where it was. Haskell grabbed his arm, turned him toward the patrol car, and told him to stop making it worse. Now other people started paying attention. A woman loading groceries stopped and pulled out her phone. A delivery driver near the coffee shop began recording as well. One of the pharmacy employees stood near the entrance and watched Priya Shah try again to explain that the purchase had likely already been made. Haskell told her to stay back. The pattern was clear by then. Every fact that could have ended the stop was treated like interference. Evan did not resist. He did not pull away. He did not yell. He said he paid for the charger and asked to call his father. Haskell treated that request like defiance. He took control of the backpack and searched it himself. Inside were school papers, a notebook, a pencil case, and gym clothes. There was nothing stolen inside. There was nothing hidden inside. There was no support for the theft claim at all. A competent officer would have ended it there. Haskell shifted to a different justification. He started talking about suspicious behavior and concealment. Officers do that when the original reason for the stop falls apart and they still want to hold the scene. The problem for him was that the facts had already become too clean. A paid purchase, a receipt available, a manager trying to verify the transaction, and an empty backpack as far as stolen goods were concerned. He had nothing solid left. Priya Shah came back out with the transaction record. She had the timestamp and item list. She stated directly that the charger, drink, and gum had been paid for. Haskell still did not release the boy. That was the worst part of the stop. A single bad suspicion can sometimes be explained. Continuing after the evidence clears, the person is where the stop starts looking deliberate. He had been corrected by the store manager, by the purchase record, and by the search results. He still kept a child pinned to a patrol car in public. Then he asked for the boy's full name. Evan gave it. Haskell asked for the father's name. Evan told him Daniel Mercer. Haskell did not take that seriously. He acted like the boy was trying to scare him off with an important name. He called the name into dispatch while keeping Evan in place. Dispatch asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. A few seconds later, they asked him to repeat it again, slower this time. That changed the tone of the stop. Haskell did not understand the full problem yet, but he felt it. The radio lost its casual rhythm. Dispatch became careful. The supervisor's attention came quickly after that. Sergeant Lena Ortiz called him directly and asked whether he had confirmed stolen property. He had not. She asked whether the store manager verified payment. He admitted that she had said the items were paid for. She asked whether the juvenile's parent had been contacted. He said no. She asked whether this boy was being physically detained. His answer was incomplete, which told her enough. Ortiz said she was on her way. By then, the parking lot had gone quiet. The bystanders kept recording. Priya Shah stopped arguing and started watching closely. Evan stayed controlled, but he looked shaken. Haskell still tried to hold the posture of a man in charge, but it was beginning to crack. Dispatch came back once more and told him to hold the scene for a supervisor. That was when the name finally landed with him. Daniel Mercer was not just a random parent. He was the incoming Metropolitan Police Chief. He was the man the department had been talking about for weeks. He was the man who would soon have authority over discipline, command decisions, and internal review. And Officer Ryan Haskell had his 13-year-old son pressed against a patrol car over a theft that had already been disproved. Haskell looked at Evan again. Same school hoodie, same backpack, same pharmacy bag. Nothing about the boy had changed. Only the officer's understanding had changed. And by then, it was far too late. Sergeant Lena Ortiz arrived within minutes. She stepped out and looked at Evan Mercer against the patrol car, looked at the store manager holding the transaction record, and understood the situation fast. Officer Haskell had started with a weak theft suspicion and turned it into a physical detention of a child after the evidence had already moved against him. She asked him one direct question. She wanted to know whether he had confirmed any stolen property. He had not. She asked Priya Shah whether the items had been paid for. Shah told her they had. She showed her the register record with the time, the item list, and the payment. Ortiz then asked whether Evan had been allowed to call a parent. He had not. She asked whether Haskell had searched the backpack. He had. She asked whether that search found stolen property. It had not. That was enough. She told Haskell to step away from the boy. He started explaining himself before he moved. That made him look worse. He was still trying to control the story when a supervisor had already taken control of the scene. Ortiz repeated the order. This time he stepped back. She turned to Evan and asked whether he was injured. He said he was not injured, but he was shaken. She asked him for a short account of what happened. He gave it in order. He said he paid inside. He said he tried to show the receipt. He said the officer grabbed him before he could take it out. He said he asked to call his father and was not allowed. That was a clean statement. It matched the manager's account and the basic timeline already forming around the stop. Ortiz then told Evan he could call his father. Daniel Mercer answered immediately. Evan told him he had been stopped outside the pharmacy over something he paid for. He told him a supervisor was there now. Mercer asked whether he was safe at that moment. Evan said yes. Mercer said he was coming. That was when Haskell understood he no longer had room to fix this in the field. Up to that point, he was still operating on instinct. He was still hoping procedure and tone would cover the weakness of the stop. Once the father was on the way and the supervisor had already heard the basics, the situation changed. This was no longer about whether he could keep control of a child in a parking lot. It was about whether his report could survive contact with body camera footage, store records, witness video, and command review. He tried to improve his position. He told Ortiz the juvenile had acted nervously. He said the movement toward the pocket raised concerns. He said he was investigating possible concealment. He said the totality of the circumstances justified the stop. None of it helped. Every explanation came after the key facts. The purchase had been verified. The backpack had nothing in it. The child had asked to show a receipt and was blocked from doing it. The store manager had tried to correct him more than once. Those details did not leave much room for creative reporting. A black SUV pulled into the lot a few minutes later. Daniel Mercer stepped out and walked straight to his son. He did not stop at Haskell first. He did not make a scene. He checked Evan's arms, face, and posture. He asked whether Haskell had handcuffed him. Evan said no, but he said the officer grabbed him and held him against the car. Mercer asked whether he had been allowed to show the receipt. Evan said no. He asked whether the store had confirmed payment. Evan said the manager tried to tell the officer that. Mercer then turned to Ortiz and asked whether his son was free to leave. Ortiz said yes. He asked whether the department had any evidence of theft. Ortiz said no. That answer settled the public part of the scene. Evan was no longer being detained. The problem for Haskell was that the stop did not end when the detention ended. It moved into a more dangerous stage. Mercer asked Shaw whether the store would preserve all footage and the transaction record. She said yes. He looked toward the bystanders recording and understood immediately that the stop had already left the control of the officer who started it. There were now multiple records of the same event. That usually decides these cases before the paperwork even begins. Then Mercer addressed Haskell. He did not threaten him. He did not raise his voice. He asked narrow questions in a calm tone. He asked when the officer first had probable cause for a theft detention. He asked what specific stolen item had been identified. He asked why the stop continued after the manager confirmed payment. He asked why a juvenile had been denied immediate parent contact while being physically controlled in public. Haskell tried answering, but the sequence hurt him. A bad stop can sound forceful in real time. It sounds very different when someone breaks it into steps and asks what fact justified each step. He had no good answer for the moment he grabbed the boy. He had no good answer for the bag search after the boy said the receipt was in his pocket. He had no good answer for continuing the detention after the transaction was verified. Mercer did not drag it out. He told Ortiz that every recording tied to the stop needed preservation orders immediately. He included body camera footage, vehicle camera footage, store surveillance, dispatch traffic, and the incident call record. He told her the watch commander needed notice before the end of the hour. He also told her internal affairs had to be informed that same evening. Haskell stood there and watched the stop turn into evidence management around him. That was the real turn. He had started the encounter, assuming the badge on his chest gave him the final word. Now his own chain of command was moving to secure the record before he could shape it. Mercer took Evan to the SUV, but he did not leave immediately. He stayed long enough to make one point very clear. He told Ortiz that the case should not be treated differently because his son was involved. It should be treated exactly the way any case should be treated. When an officer detained a minor without confirming the offense, ignored proof of purchase, and kept escalating after being corrected. That point traveled through the department fast. It mattered because officers often expect quiet protection when they embarrass the agency. Mercer cut that off before it started. He was not offering a private resolution. He was telling the department to follow the facts all the way through. By the end of the shift, Haskell had to submit a formal statement. The first review went badly for him. Body camera footage showed Evan staying respectful. It showed him trying to explain the receipt. It showed Priya Shah attempting to verify the purchase. It showed the backpack search producing nothing. It showed Haskell keep physical control after the stop had already lost its basis. The dispatch log hurt him too. It showed when the father's name was run. It showed how the tone changed once the identity became clear. It showed the supervisor arriving before the officer corrected anything on his own. That last part mattered a lot. He could not claim he quickly fixed an honest mistake. The footage showed the opposite. He stayed committed until supervision forced the stop to reverse. Late that night, Haskell got a call from the watch commander telling him he was being placed on administrative leave pending formal review. That is where officers start realizing whether a department is about to protect them or cut them loose. He tried calling people he thought might soften it. A former supervisor, a union contact, another officer who owed him favors. He kept using the same defense. He said it was a retail theft investigation that got politically sensitive because of the family name. That argument sounded better in his head than it did on paper. The family name did not create the misconduct. It just removed his ability to bury it. By the next morning, Senior command had reviewed the basic facts. The case was already bigger than one parking lot stop. The first question inside the department was no longer whether Haskell handled one child badly. The first question was how many other stops like this existed in his history that nobody had pulled apart because the family at the center did not have power. That question was dangerous for him, because once a department starts asking it, they do not stop at one report. Once the department opened Officer Haskell's record, the stop in the pharmacy lot stopped looking like one bad decision and started looking like a pattern. Internal Affairs pulled his body camera history, complaint file, stop reports, and use of force reviews. They focused on retail stops, juvenile contacts, and encounters that started with weak suspicion and ended with physical control. That review moved fast because the incoming chief's son was involved, but the findings did not depend on that fact. The findings depended on paperwork, footage, and numbers. Haskell had more than one prior complaint for rough treatment during low-level stops. Most had gone nowhere. A few had been closed as not sustained because there was no clear video, no independent witness, or no supervisor willing to push it further. On paper, that gave him cover. Under a full review, it gave investigators a trail. They found repeated problems. He escalated quickly. He stretched vague suspicion into prolonged detentions. He used words like evasive, furtive, and uncooperative in reports, where the footage showed fear more than resistance. He often framed ordinary movement as a threat once he needed a reason to justify getting physical. It was the same method again and again. Decide first, build the language later. That review changed the case. Now, the issue is not only what he did to Evan Mercer. The issue is whether supervisors had been ignoring warning signs because the people on the receiving end had less power, less money, and less access. Daniel Mercer understood that immediately. He did not treat the case as a private family matter. He did not want a quiet apology and a transfer. He pushed for a full administrative review and made it clear that the department would either examine the pattern honestly or admit it had been protecting bad street work. That made people nervous all over headquarters. By the end of the week, Haskell was still on an administrative leave. His badge and weapon had been surrendered, and his union representative was involved in every formal interview. He tried the same defense one more time. He said he responded to a possible shoplifting call, encountered a nervous juvenile, and acted in good faith under uncertain conditions. That defense collapsed when investigators laid out the timeline. First, there was no confirmed theft before he stopped Evan. Second, Evan told him he had a receipt. Third, the store manager attempted to verify the purchase almost immediately. Fourth, the backpack search found no stolen property. Fifth, Haskell still continued the detention. Sixth, he denied or delayed parent contact for a minor while physically controlling him in public. Seventh, he only lost momentum when dispatch verified the father's name and a supervisor arrived. That sequence was devastating because it stripped away every excuse. An honest mistake should get weaker as the facts come in and then stop. Haskell did the opposite. He got corrected and pushed harder. The case then moved outside the department. Mercer hired outside counsel for his son. That was another bad sign for the city. Once experienced civil rights lawyers reviewed the footage, they saw the same thing Internal Affairs had already seen. Weak cause, unnecessary physical detention, a minor. Clear exculpatory evidence ignored in real time, public humiliation, a strong argument for selective enforcement and profiling. The city law department knew what that meant. This was no longer a case they could defend cheaply. The footage also leaked. It did not take long. One bystander video reached local media first. Then body camera details started appearing in reporting. The public reaction was immediate because the facts were simple enough for anyone to follow. A child bought a charger, a drink, and gum. A patrolman stopped him, refused to check the receipt properly, grabbed him, searched his bag, ignored the store manager, and kept going until he learned who the father was. The worst part for the department was obvious. People started asking the same question everywhere. If that boy had not been the chief's son, would anything have happened to the officer at all? The department had no good answer to that. Community groups picked up the case. So did defense attorneys, who had seen Haskell's name before. A few former complainants came forward after seeing the news. One man said Haskell had detained him outside a convenience store the year before on almost the same theory. Another family said their teenage nephew had been searched during a bicycle stop with no citation and no follow-up. Separately, those complaints had gone nowhere. Together, they started to look like a map. The city moved toward damage control. Haskell was called into a final disciplinary conference. He attended with union representation. Investigators laid out policy violations tied to unlawful detention, failure to de-escalate, improper juvenile handling, inaccurate or misleading reporting language, and conduct unbecoming. He tried to defend the stop as a split-second field judgment. That argument was weak because the footage showed multiple chances to stop and multiple choices to continue. The department terminated him. That alone would have been serious, but it did not stop there. The State Certification Board received the case file for decertification review. That put his future in law enforcement at risk beyond one department. Once that process started, his career was effectively over. Even before the board finished, no serious agency was going to touch an officer whose misconduct file now included a high-profile juvenile detention, public video, and a pattern review that exposed repeated problems. The civil case ended the way cases like this usually end when the facts are bad enough. The city settled. The settlement was large, and it came with more than money. Evan Mercer's legal team pushed for formal policy changes, recorded training requirements, and an independent audit of juvenile stop procedures. The city agreed to a package that included financial compensation for Evan, mandatory retraining on retail theft investigations, revised juvenile contact rules, stricter evidence preservation requirements, and an early warning review system for officers with repeated complaint patterns. That part mattered more than the headline number. A settlement closes one case. Policy changes admit the case revealed something real. Daniel Mercer used the incident in his first months as chief to force changes inside the department. Officers could no longer stretch a vague, suspicious person call into a full detention without documented cause. Juvenile stops required faster guardian notification. Supervisors had to review body camera footage in any public detention of a minor involving no arrest. Language and reports got more scrutiny, especially the usual vague terms officers use to hide weak facts. Mercer also reopened review standards for repeated low-level complaints that had been ignored because each one looked small on its own. That made enemies for him inside the department, but he did not care. He had seen what happened when a child did everything right and still got treated like a suspect because one patrolman trusted his own assumptions more than facts. Evan recovered, but the stop stayed with him. Not because he had been injured badly, because he learned early what a uniform can do when the wrong person wears it. He also learned something else. Records matter, witnesses matter, procedure matters, calm matters. The truth does not always win in the moment, but it gets stronger when the evidence holds. Officer Haskell thought he was dealing with one nervous kid outside a pharmacy. He was really exposing the way he worked in front of cameras, witnesses, supervisors, lawyers, the city, and the next chief of police. That was the mistake. Not just grabbing the wrong boy. Showing the whole system exactly what he had probably been doing to people who could not fight back. That is why his career collapsed so fast once the review started. The stop was bad. The record behind it was worse. If you have seen a stop like this in real life, say what stood out to you. If you were standing in that parking lot, what would you have done? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe.
Both of you stand up and get out, now.
What exactly are you detaining us for?
Missing
A
wallet.
complaint isn't probable cause.
I didn't ask for legal
You
commentary.
need to slow down and verify before you do something
Don't
stupid.
tell me how to do my job.
And do it right.
You're being detained.
For what facts?
Felony theft, possible fraudulent
You
identification.
just made that worse. You
Stand
are
up.
interfering.
Officer Caleb Daniels thought he controlled that lunchroom. He thought 2 handcuffs, a loud voice, and a theft accusation would settle everything before anyone questioned him. He was wrong. Very wrong. Because the 2 black sisters he grabbed in front of half the restaurant were not random suspects. One was a federal prosecutor. The other was an FBI agent. Daniels didn't know that yet. He just knew they weren't reacting the way he wanted, and that got under his skin fast. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you like stories where arrogant people push too far and get exposed for it, like this video, and subscribe. This happened during a weekday lunch rush in a downtown restaurant near the federal courthouse. Busy room. Lawyers, staffers, business people, people who noticed everything even when they pretended not to. Avery Cole and her younger sister Nia had met there for lunch because their schedules almost never matched. Avery was the older sister, 37, assistant U.S. attorney. Precise, calm, hard to shake. She dealt with pressure for a living and didn't waste words. Nia was 34, more reserved, more watchful. She worked for the FBI and was tied to an active matter she couldn't casually explain to a patrol officer in a crowded dining room. That became a problem within minutes. The trouble started with a missing wallet. A woman in the restaurant reported that her wallet was gone after she passed near the front of the room. She said she had bumped into the sisters earlier. That was enough for the manager to panic and call police. No camera check first. No serious attempt to verify anything. Just a quick assumption and a fast call. Daniels arrived ready to make an arrest scene out of it. He walked straight to their table with the manager behind him and told both women to stand up. Not asked, told. Avery looked up, stayed composed, and asked what facts connected them to any theft. Daniels didn't answer that cleanly because he didn't have much. He repeated the order and made it louder. That was the first shift. He wasn't investigating. He was asserting control. Avery didn't match his energy. She said she would comply with lawful instructions, but she wanted the basis for the detention. That should have slowed a decent officer down. It didn't slow Daniels at all. He heard a legal question and treated it like disrespect. He ordered both sisters away from the table and demanded ID. Avery handed hers over first. She had federal credentials because she'd come from court. Daniels looked at them, then looked at her. And instead of stepping back and verifying properly, he started acting like the credentials were suspicious. That told everyone exactly where his head was. He had already decided the story. Now he wanted facts to fit it. Nia saw it too. She tried to stop it without saying too much. She identified herself in a limited way and told him he needed to verify before doing anything reckless. Daniels didn't like that either. He read restraint as evasiveness. Some officers do that when they've already locked into the wrong theory. By then, people were watching openly. The restaurant had gone quiet in that specific way public places do when everybody knows something is off. Servers slowed down. A couple of diners pulled out phones. The manager stayed close, which made it worse. Nobody wanted to be the one to tell Daniels he was moving too fast. Daniels asked where the wallet was. Avery said they had nothing to do with it and told him a complaint alone did not give him probable cause. Again, she was calm. Again, that made him worse. He told them not to touch their bags. He started speaking like he was already in the middle of a felony stop. Still no recovered wallet. Still no witness who saw a theft. Still no camera review. Still no proper verification. Then he crossed the line. Avery moved one hand toward her bag, not to grab a weapon, not to hide anything, just to shift it on the table. Daniels grabbed her wrist. That changed the whole thing. He put hands on her because he could, because he wanted immediate submission, and because he was now too deep into his own ego to back up. Avery pulled her arm back and told him not to touch her without cause. Daniels responded by escalating. He announced that both women were being detained for felony theft and possible fraudulent identification. He said it loud enough for the room to hear. He wanted the accusation to land before the facts did. That was the moment the stop turned ugly, not messy, not confused, ugly, because now he had chosen force over verification. Nia gave him one more chance. She told him he was interfering with federal business and needed a supervisor before he made this worse. Daniels ignored that, too. He had an audience. He wanted to win in front of it. He pulled out the cuffs. A man near the bar started recording more carefully the second those cuffs came out. A woman at another table asked whether anyone had checked the cameras. Daniels ignored that. He cuffed Avery first. That mattered later. Video showed Avery did not resist. She didn't create the scene. She didn't raise her voice. Daniels escalated around her, then acted as if her refusal to panic was itself suspicious. Then he turned to Nia. This was the bigger mistake. Nia tried once more to get him to verify through a secure federal contact. She gave him the route to do this the right way. He chose not to use it before cuffing her. That decision wrecked him later because there was no good explanation for it. He had an off-ramp. He refused it. So now both sisters stood in handcuffs in the middle of a packed lunchroom because a patrol officer had decided his instincts mattered more than evidence. Then dispatch started catching up. Avery's credentials came back valid first. Current, federal, real. That should have ended it on the spot. Daniels didn't uncuff her. He started talking faster instead, reframing, filling space. Trying to hold onto the scene, bad sign. He knew the ground was moving under him. Then the second layer hit. The secure contact tied to Nia's identification started coming back through channels. That changed the tone immediately. Dispatch got careful, then tense, then very careful. Daniels had gone from mishandling a restaurant theft complaint to detaining someone tied to federal work he clearly did not understand. That was when Sergeant Elena Ruiz arrived. She stepped into a bad scene and saw the problem fast. 2 women in cuffs, 1 patrol officer giving a weak summary, a manager hovering nearby, a room full of witnesses. Phones still up. Ruiz asked Daniels what he had. He gave her theft, suspicious ID, non-compliance. It sounded thin because it was thin. Then dispatch confirmed Avery again. Ruiz looked at the credential in Daniels' hand, then at Avery, then at Daniels. A few seconds later, the callback link to Nia came through. That was it. Nobody in that room knew all the details yet. They didn't need to. The shift was obvious. Daniels had walked in thinking he was about to embarrass 2 suspects in public. Instead, he had created a recorded, witnessed, career-ending mess in front of a room full of people who were now paying very close attention. And the worst part for him? This was only the beginning. Sergeant Ruiz didn't need 10 minutes to understand Daniels had a problem. She needed about 10 seconds. The first confirmation had already come through. Avery's credentials were valid. Federal, current. No question. Ruiz asked Daniels whether he had run them before cuffing her. He gave the kind of answer officers give when they know the body cam is about to hurt them. Too many words, no clean answer. Then the second verification started landing. Nia's information wasn't something dispatch handled like a driver's license. It moved through a secure callback. That alone should have told Daniels he had stepped into something bigger than a restaurant complaint. Ruiz took the update, listened, and her expression changed right there in the dining room. Now she knew. One sister was a federal prosecutor. The other was tied to active federal work Daniels had just disrupted in public. That's when panic started, even if nobody said the word out loud. Ruiz told Daniels to uncuff them. Immediately. He hesitated for half a beat, which made it worse. Then he took the cuffs off Avery first, then Nia. Too late. Everybody had already seen the arrest. Several people were still recording. One person had gotten the whole cuffing on video, including Avery staying calm and Daniels talking like he had a solved felony case with no evidence in hand. Ruiz tried to pull the scene back under control. She asked the manager to step aside. She separated Daniels from the sisters. She lowered her voice. Standard cleanup. The problem was this wasn't the kind of mess a lower voice could fix. Avery didn't make a speech. She didn't need to. She asked for Daniel's full name, badge number, and supervisor chain. Then she asked whether Ruiz understood that her unlawful detention had happened in front of a room full of witnesses after she presented valid federal credentials. Straight, cold, precise. Ruiz knew exactly what that meant. Nia was even more direct. She explained that Daniels had ignored multiple chances to verify identity through the proper channel before making physical contact and applying cuffs. She also made clear that the public arrest had created problems beyond embarrassment. Daniels had interfered with federal work he knew nothing about. That wasn't a dramatic line. That was the real damage. The missing wallet claim started falling apart almost immediately. The restaurant manager, who had acted very confident 15 minutes earlier, suddenly had no details. No one had seen the sisters take anything. No wallet had been found on them. No search had produced stolen property. No camera review had been done before police were called to the table. The original complaining customer got nervous too. Her version started shifting once it became obvious the stop had gone sideways. Then staff checked the area near the hostess stand. The wallet had been left under a chair. That detail buried Daniels even deeper, because now the whole thing looked exactly like what it was. A rushed accusation, a manager too eager to believe it, and an officer who skipped every safeguard because two calm black women didn't fit his idea of who belonged there. Ruiz heard that update and knew the department's position just got worse. Daniels tried to save himself. He started talking about suspicious behavior, inconsistent responses, possible concealment. None of it held up. The footage would show what happened. The room had eyes, the phones had timestamps. Dispatch had the verification logs. His body cam had his tone, his decisions, and the moment he chose cuffs before facts. That's the thing about officers like Daniels. They think authority gives them room to improvise. It does until the record exists. Once the record exists, improvisation turns into evidence. Avery asked for medical documentation of the wrist restraint and requested immediate preservation of all body cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, restaurant surveillance, and witness information. She was already building the case, while Daniels was still trying to explain himself. That's the difference between somebody who knows the system and somebody who thinks the uniform is the system. Naya took a different track. She stepped aside and made a secure call. Short, controlled. No wasted words. That call changed the stakes again. Within minutes, people above Ruiz started getting notified. Not because anybody wanted drama, because they had to know that a local patrol officer had publicly detained someone connected to a federal matter after ignoring a verification route. Ruiz asked Avery whether she wanted EMS. Avery said she wanted documentation. She wanted names. She wanted incident numbers. She wanted a copy request placed on every recording before anything disappeared by accident or on purpose. Smart move. Too many people calm down after the cuffs come off. That's how departments survive these cases. They count on embarrassment fading into exhaustion. Avery wasn't built like that. She knew the apology phase means nothing if the paper trail doesn't lock in first. The lunch crowd had fully turned by then. At first, people watched like it was another police scene. Now they were whispering about Daniels. A man in a suit told Ruiz he had video from the first command at the table. A woman near the back said she recorded the moment Avery handed over her credentials. Another diner said Daniels never asked anyone to check cameras before he grabbed her. Bit by bit, the witnesses got sharper because now they understood what they had seen. The manager tried apologizing. Wrong timing, empty words. Avery barely acknowledged it. She knew where the real liability sat. The manager helped start it. Daniels turned it into a legal disaster. Then Internal Affairs got the first alert. Not a full investigation yet. Just the early call no officer once attached to his name. Unlawful detention concern. Federal credential issue. Public recording. Possible bias exposure. Ruiz heard the call, answered carefully, and kept looking at Daniels like she already knew he'd be impossible to defend. He looked smaller now. Not sorry. Smaller. That happens when the performance dies. Without the audience fear, without the force, without the assumption that everyone will just accept his version, Daniels had nothing strong left. Just bad judgment and a growing stack of evidence. Avery and Nia left the restaurant without rushing. That mattered too. They didn't storm out. They didn't rant. They let the scene sit on Daniels exactly as he had made it. Outside, the next phase started. Avery called the U.S. Attorney's office and reported the detention. Clean summary. Time, place, officer, witnesses, credentials shown. Cuffs applied after verification was available. No emotion in the language. Just facts. That's how serious people make damage travel. Nia's side moved faster and quieter. Once her chain knew what happened, the concern wasn't optics, it was exposure. A public detention can blow attention onto patterns, locations, routines, faces. Daniels had no clue what kind of risk he'd created because he never stopped long enough to ask whether maybe he didn't know enough. By late afternoon, the first video hit social media. No fancy caption needed. Just the clip. Daniels at the table. Daniels refusing to slow down. Daniels putting cuffs on a calm woman in a blazer while diners stared. Then another clip. Then another. By evening, local reporters were calling the department. That was the point of no return. Because now it wasn't Daniels versus two women he thought he could overpower in a restaurant. Now it was Daniels versus video, witnesses, dispatch records, federal confirmation, and two sisters who actually understood how to make the system answer for what it did. And he still hadn't seen the worst part yet. By the next morning, the department had lost control of the story. The video was everywhere locally. Then it jumped wider. Not because it was loud, because it was clear. People could see Daniels arrive hot, skip basic verification, grab Avery, ignore warnings, and cuff both sisters like he was proud of it. That kind of footage kills the usual excuses before they even get drafted. The department first tried the standard line. Active investigation. Limited facts. No further comment. That didn't hold. Too many facts were already out. Avery's credentials had been confirmed on scene. The wallet had been found in the restaurant. No stolen property had been recovered from either sister. Witnesses were already talking. One of them was a law student. Another was a litigation paralegal. Bad room for a cop to freelance in. Avery moved first. She filed preservation notices fast. Bodycam, dashcam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, restaurant surveillance, officer notes, supervisor communications, incident report drafts. She didn't wait for a formal apology because apologies don't preserve evidence. Paperwork does. Then came the claim. Unlawful detention, false arrest, excessive force tied to the wrist grab and cuffing, civil rights violations, public humiliation, reputational harm, failure to train, failure to supervise, biased policing, clean structure, no wasted motion. Nia's side hit differently. Her detention triggered an internal federal review because Daniels had interfered with an active matter. The exact case details stayed sealed, but the damage didn't. Her cover status had been compromised enough that her assignment had to be adjusted. New logistics, new risk analysis, new costs. All because a patrol officer wanted to turn lunch into a power show. That raised the city's exposure hard. This wasn't just two bad cuffs anymore. It was local police interfering with federal personnel after ignoring direct verification routes. Departments hate that. City attorneys hate it more. Then discovery pressure started. Daniels' report came in first, and it already had problems. He padded it, claimed suspicious movements, claimed inconsistent answers, claimed officer safety concerns in a packed lunchroom where video showed two seated women and no actual threat. Classic mistake. He wrote for cover, not accuracy. Then the body cam got pulled. Bad move for him. Worse than bad. It showed Avery asking the legal basis for the detention. It showed Daniels refusing to answer clearly. It showed him treating valid federal credentials like props in a story he'd already written in his head. It showed Nia trying to get him to verify through the right channel. It showed him cuff first and think later. That ended the misunderstanding defense. Then Internal Affairs found something else. Daniels had prior complaints, not enough by themselves to end him earlier. Enough to make this one look less like a one-time mistake and more like a pattern people had ignored. Citizens had accused him before of escalating fast, talking down to people, and treating basic questions as defiance. A couple of complaints had gone nowhere. One had led to counseling. That history came back now and hit the department too, because once you keep a guy like that on the street, his next mess becomes partly yours. The city tried to settle quietly. Avery didn't go public with every detail right away. Smart. She let the record build first. Let the city see the problem clearly. Let Daniels' own report and footage fight each other. That's how you break resistance in these cases. You don't argue and the evidence can do the work. Nia stayed even quieter, but her presence behind the scenes mattered. Federal contacts were now paying attention to a local department that had embarrassed itself on camera and compromised protected work. That pressure wasn't public at first. It didn't need to be. It was there. A few weeks later, the department announced Daniels had been placed on leave. Nobody was impressed. Leave is what departments do when they're hoping the public gets distracted. This time, it didn't work. Reporters kept pulling on it. More witness video came out. The restaurant staff changed their story 3 different ways. The woman who lost the wallet admitted she never actually saw either sister take anything. She had assumed. That word showed up a lot. Assumed. The manager assumed. Daniels assumed. Funny how assumption keeps landing on the same kind of people. Then the hammer dropped. Daniels was fired. The department said he violated detention protocol, failed to properly verify identification, made an arrest without sufficient probable cause, and gave inaccurate justifications afterward. That language was careful, but the message was simple. He cooked his own career. It didn't end there. The state certification board opened review. Once the body cam and internal findings were in, his law enforcement certification went with it. That mattered more than the firing. A fired officer can sometimes hop departments. Decertification shuts more doors. Then the civil case settled. The amount stayed partly confidential, but enough came out to make the point. The city paid, a lot. Avery received damages tied to unlawful detention, reputational harm, and civil rights violations. Nia's side included the operational disruption her arrest created. The restaurant and management company got pulled in too and paid their share after their own rush-to-judgment failures became impossible to deny. That's what arrogance costs when there's video. The policy fallout came next. The department rolled out mandatory supervisor approval before escalating fraud or theft complaints involving credential disputes in low-evidence public settings. They changed verification procedures for government identification. They expanded bias review triggers when probable cause depended mostly on assumption and demeanor. They tightened preservation rules for body cam and public complaint incidents. None of that came from conscience. It came from damage. Avery went back to work. That part mattered. She didn't become a public mascot. She didn't build a media career off it. She went back to doing her job, which in some ways made the whole story hit harder. Daniels made the lunch his performance. Avery made the aftermath a case. Nia kept working, too, just on a different path after the disruption. No dramatic speech, no victory lap. Just adjustment, documentation, and moving forward. Real people usually don't get clean endings after this kind of thing. They get consequences, paperwork, stress, and the knowledge that they were right from the beginning. That's the lesson here. Daniels thought authority meant he could skip discipline. He thought the badge would cover the gaps. He thought public pressure would make two black women fold before facts mattered. Instead, he ran into two people who knew exactly what he was doing and knew how to make the record hold. That's why this story matters. Not because the sisters had important jobs. That made the fallout bigger, yes. But the real issue was what happened before Daniels knew who they were. He treated them like suspects first, because he thought he could. Everything after that just exposed him. So that's the story. A patrol officer turned a lunch complaint into a false felony arrest, ignored warnings, ignored verification, and ended up losing his job, his certification, and any claim that this was just a misunderstanding. Two sisters got their names cleared, forced a payout, exposed a pattern, and pushed the department into changes it never would have made on its own. Let me know what you would have done in that restaurant, and whether you've ever seen someone in uniform push way past the facts because they thought nobody would challenge them. Share the story with somebody who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more.
Then ask the right question and do your job correctly.
You think because people know your name, you can stand wherever you want?
That is not what is happening here.
What I see is someone expecting everyone else to cover for them.
What you turn this into is an unlawful
Officer Miller thought he was the most powerful man in the room until he grabbed the arm of the one man in that building who could end his career with facts, witnesses, and the law. At a high-profile charity gala, he pushed past every warning, every correction, every chance to slow down. He had no idea he was detaining a black federal judge on property tied to the judge's own foundation. And once he put hands on him in front of donors, cameras, and city leadership, the whole thing stopped being a scene and turned into a career-killing event. Before this goes further, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about abuse of power, public accountability, and people who stay calm while somebody else self-destructs, hit like and subscribe. This wasn't some vague misunderstanding in a dark parking lot. That's what made it so bad. This happened under chandeliers, valley lights, security cameras, phone cameras, and a whole room full of people who understood status, optics, and liability. The second they saw Miller's tone was off. The man he stopped was Judge Malcolm Ellison, a federal judge with a reputation that reached past the courthouse. Late 50s, controlled, careful. Not the kind of man who needed to announce himself twice. He was one of the featured honorees that night. The gala itself raised money for legal aid clinics, scholarship funds, and youth mentorship programs. Half the city's money was there. The other half of the city's influence was there. Corporate sponsors, nonprofit boards, senior attorneys, a few elected officials, local media. Plenty of people who knew exactly who Malcolm Ellison was the second they saw him step out of the black sedan near the side entrance. And that was the first thing Miller got wrong. He looked at the car, not the context. The estate hosting the event had a circular drive in front, a secured service lane to the side, and a restricted access point near the garden entrance. Event staff had been moving vehicles with military-level coordination for over an hour. Valets had lists. Private security had lists. The foundation staff had lists. Everybody working that entrance knew the flow. Miller didn't care about the flow. He cared that he saw a black man near a restricted lane beside an expensive car. And in his head, that was enough to take over. He'd been assigned outside traffic support. Simple job. Keep the perimeter clean, coordinate with private security, don't freelance, don't create problems. Basic stuff. But Miller wasn't built for basic stuff when he thought he had an audience. He liked taking control fast. He liked the posture of enforcement. The Bodycam later showed it clearly. He walked up already convinced he was about to correct somebody. Judge Ellison had just stepped out of the vehicle and was speaking to an event coordinator about timing. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't trying to slip in anywhere. He had his formal invitation packet, credential badge, and phone in hand. Staff were already greeting him by name. Miller cut straight through that. He demanded identification in the kind of voice officers use when they want the whole area to know they're in charge, not firm, aggressive. He framed it like the judge had no business being where he stood. Then he started talking about unauthorized vehicle placement and restricted access like he'd caught somebody trying something slick. Right there, the night could have gone 10 different ways. That's the important part. Miller had exits, plenty of them. An event coordinator immediately told him Judge Ellison was expected. A member of the private security team stepped in and explained that the vehicle had clearance for temporary drop-off. One of the valet supervisors tried to show Miller the access list. He brushed all of that aside. Fast. Too fast. That tells you what this was. He wasn't investigating. He was asserting. Judge Ellison answered him the way disciplined people answer men looking for a reaction, calmly. He identified himself. He explained he was a guest of honor. He pointed out that staff could verify everything in seconds. Miller treated every word like resistance. The crowd nearby started noticing because tone travels faster than facts. Guests at the outer edge of the reception area turned towards the driveway. Conversations stalled. A local news producer standing near the entrance lifted her phone. One donor did the same, then another. People do that now. They record first and sort it out later. And honestly, in a situation like this, that's exactly what saved the truth. Miller moved closer. Too close. He started giving commands instead of asking questions. He said the judge needed to stop talking and comply. He waved off the badge packet before really looking at it. He ignored the coordinator again. Then he said something that shifted the whole thing from ugly to dangerous. He suggested Judge Ellison was acting like he belonged there because people around him were covering for him. That was the line. That was where the room changed. Up to that point, some people still looked confused. Maybe this officer was just keyed up. Maybe he'd made a bad read and was about to fix it. But once he implied that the black man standing in formal wear at a gala in his own city couldn't possibly belong unless somebody was making excuses for him, the confusion started draining out of the air. People understood what they were watching. Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture back. He simply repeated who he was, stated that staff had already confirmed it, and told Miller he needed to slow down before he created a legal problem for himself and for the department. That should have landed. It didn't. Some men hear a warning and take it. Miller heard one and got offended. He asked for a physical ID again, sharper this time. Judge Ellison reached towards his inside jacket pocket slowly, carefully, exactly how any sane person would want it done during a police encounter. Miller reacted like the movement itself justified escalation. He ordered the judge to stop reaching. Staff started talking over each other. One Foundation board member stepped forward and identified the judge by title. Another guest, a retired state appellate judge, called out that Miller needed to stand down and verify before doing anything stupid. Miller snapped back that nobody there was going to tell him how to do his job. That one mattered too, because now it wasn't about confusion. It was ego. He was no longer trying to determine who Malcolm Ellison was. He was trying to win in public, and Judge Ellison knew it. You could hear it in the even way he answered. He told Miller again that the property, the event staff, and the guest credentials would all confirm the same thing. He told him witnesses were recording. He told him there was still time to step back and correct course. Miller didn't step back. He squared up, put a hand near his cuffs, started giving the kind of clipped commands officers use when they want instant submission. Around them, people stopped pretending this would settle itself. Phones stayed up. A city council member moved away and started calling somebody. Private security looked trapped, as they knew intervening physically against a uniformed officer would make it worse. The valet line froze. Even the music inside the gala felt irrelevant at that point. Everybody saw the same thing. One man was keeping control. The other just had a badge and a bad temper. Then Miller told Judge Ellison to put his hands behind his back. Judge Ellison didn't argue. He didn't step back. He didn't perform for the crowd. He did the exact opposite of what Miller seemed to want. He stayed still and kept talking in the same controlled tone, telling the officer that this detention had no legal basis, that multiple people had already confirmed his identity, and that Miller was escalating in front of a recorded audience. Miller went ahead anyway. He grabbed Ellison's wrist, pulled his arm behind his back, and pushed him into the position. hard enough to make people shout, not hard enough to leave the kind of injury that would distract from the bigger issue, just the kind of force arrogant officers use when they want pain and humiliation without looking out of control on paper. That's how men like him think. They think in reports before they think in consequences. Then the handcuffs clicked. That was it. The whole event changed in one sound. The crowd had been tense before. Now it was angry. You could feel that shift immediately. Guests moved closer, not farther away. Phones went higher. Staff stopped trying to be polite and started speaking over one another. Several people identified Judge Ellison again, louder this time with title, name, and role. One board member told Miller he was handcuffing the Host Foundation's principal honoree. A retired judge told him he was making a catastrophic mistake. A private security supervisor tried one last time to show him the credential list and the event clearance log. Miller ignored all of it because he'd already crossed the line in his own mind. Once officers like that commit in public, they stop thinking about whether they're right. They start thinking about how not to look weak. So he doubled down. He started talking about failure to comply, obstruction, restricted access. He threw out words that sounded official but didn't match the facts anybody could see. That happens a lot when bad policing gets exposed in real time. The officer starts building a case backward. First comes the force, then comes the excuse. Judge Ellison stood there in cuffs, jacket slightly twisted, face still composed. He told Miller very plainly that he was on private property connected to the event, that he had been identified by multiple witnesses, and that Miller had now added unlawful restraint to an already baseless stop. He also made it clear that every second after that point increased the department's liability. And Miller still didn't stop. He made a remark about how everybody suddenly had a title when police showed up. Then he questioned whether Ellison was actually supposed to be inside at all. He said it like he'd caught the room in a lie. That was the mask-off moment. No room left for confusion after that. He wasn't sorting out a security issue. He had decided this black man in formal wear did not fit his idea of who belonged at that event, and he treated that assumption like evidence. The people around him knew it. They heard it. So did the cameras. One local reporter had moved close enough to catch the whole exchange cleanly on video. Another guest was streaming to a private account that later got clipped and spread everywhere. The Bodycam got it too, which made the department's first attempt at damage control dead on arrival before sunrise. Miller finally demanded physical identification again. This time, a Foundation staff member stepped in with Judge Ellison's credential packet already open. A federal courthouse ID was visible. So was the gala credential with Ellison's photo, title, and guest of honor designation. Miller looked at it, really looked at it, and you could see the exact second the ground shifted under him. He froze. Not for long. Maybe a second. Maybe two. But long enough for everybody around him to know he just realized exactly who he had handcuffed. Judge Malcolm Ellison, United States District Judge, honored guest, identified repeatedly before the cuffs ever went on. Miller's posture changed right there. It wasn't remorse. It was panic trying to hide inside authority. He started asking clipped questions nobody needed answered anymore. He wanted to know why nobody had made it clear. That lie didn't survive 3 feet of distance. Half the people standing there had done exactly that, repeatedly. He wanted to pivot into confusion now because certainty had just become toxic. Judge Ellison didn't let him rewrite the scene. Still cuffed, he laid it out in order. He stated that Miller had initiated an unsupported detention. He stated that staff and witnesses had verified identity and authorization multiple times. He stated that Miller had used physical restraint without probable cause, had ignored available confirming information, and had continued after explicit warning, calm, clean, precise. He wasn't speaking like a man trying to win an argument. He was speaking like a man building a record in real time. That's what broke Miller more than the title did. Not just who Ellison was, how he was handling it. Sirens didn't flood in. This wasn't that kind of scene. What arrived instead was worse for Miller. Supervisors. A patrol sergeant got there first after calls from event security, and a city official inside the gala reached command staff. He took one look at the crowd, the phones, the cuffs, and Ellison's credentials in a staff member's hand, and his face changed immediately. He pulled Miller aside. Quick, sharp. Too late. Then an assistant chief arrived from inside the event itself. He had been attending the gala in a suit, not a uniform, and he knew Judge Ellison personally. That made the whole thing even uglier. There was no buffer anymore, no maybe, no ambiguity. Just a senior department official walking into a live disaster caused by one patrol officer who refused every off-ramp. The assistant chief ordered the cuffs removed at once. Miller did it, hands suddenly less steady now. Ellison rubbed one wrist once, adjusted his jacket, and stayed exactly as composed as he'd been from the start. That made Miller look even smaller. Everybody there saw it. The assistant chief started apologizing. The sergeant started separating witnesses. Somebody from the mayor's office had already arrived at the edge of the driveway. Phones were still recording. Nobody trusted the department to summarize this honestly anymore, and honestly, they were right not to. Judge Ellison didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He simply stated that this incident would be documented in full, that all video had to be preserved, and that nobody at the scene should mistake removal of the cuffs for removal of liability. Then he looked straight at Miller and made the point that ended the encounter for good. He told him authority meant nothing without judgment, and tonight he'd shown he had neither. That was the end of the confrontation, not the end of Miller's problem, the start of it. By midnight, the department already knew this wasn't containable. There were too many angles: guest video, security footage, body cam, valet area cameras, phone clips from donors, staff, reporters, even two city officials standing near the entrance. Miller had picked the worst possible place to act like nobody would check him. A public street would have been bad. A charity gala packed with lawyers, judges, media people, and people who understood evidence. Career suicide. The first department statement came out before sunrise, and it was exactly the kind of weak, defensive language people are sick of hearing. It called the incident an active scene under review. It said the full context was still being gathered. It praised professionalism while avoiding the actual facts. That lasted a few hours. Then the Bodycam clip leaked. That changed everything. The video showed Miller brushing off staff. It showed witnesses identifying Judge Ellison more than once. It showed the federal credential. It showed the event pass. It showed Miller escalating after he'd already been given the information he needed. Worst of all for him, it showed the tone. People always focus on force, but tone tells the truth faster. He didn't sound cautious. He sounded certain. Certain in the dumbest possible way. Like he had decided what kind of man Ellison was before the interaction even started. By morning, the clip was everywhere. Legal analysts broke down the stop frame by frame. Civil rights groups picked it up. Former prosecutors went on local and national programs, explaining that the problem wasn't just a bad arrest. It was a chain of bad decisions. Unsupported detention, refusal to verify, physical restraint without a valid basis, public humiliation. Then the attempt to justify it after the fact. That last part buried him, because Miller had filed a preliminary report before the full footage surfaced, and the report didn't match the video. He wrote that Judge Ellison had been evasive. He implied staff had interfered before identity could be confirmed. He suggested the detention happened during a fluid security situation. It was nonsense. The footage shredded it line by line. That's when this stopped being only about misconduct and became about dishonesty, too. Departments can sometimes drag their feet on arrogance. Dishonesty on body cam is harder to carry. Prosecutors hate officers who poison cases. Command staff know it. City attorneys know it. Once the report fell apart, Miller stopped being just a liability in this incident. He became a liability in every case he'd ever touched. Then internal affairs started pulling his history. That's where it got worse. Not because they found one prior complaint. They found a pattern, several complaints from previous stops, escalation during minor encounters, dismissive treatment of black drivers, repeated notes from supervisors about poor judgment under perceived challenge, a prior incident where a lieutenant recommended remedial de-escalation training. Another complaint had been closed without full follow-up after body cam footage was marked inconclusive. One warning, then another, then another. Nothing big enough alone to force the issue. Together, it looked obvious. The department hadn't created Miller's ego, but it had tolerated it. That part mattered to Judge Ellison more than Miller's embarrassment ever did. He didn't turn the thing into a personal revenge campaign. He treated it like what it was. A public example of what happens when an officer with a badge, weak discipline, and racial assumptions gets too comfortable being protected by the institution around him. Within 24 hours, the mayor held a press conference. She didn't soften it. She said the conduct on video was unacceptable, humiliating, and legally indefensible. She confirmed an outside review. She also made it clear the city would not hide behind vague wording while the evidence sat in public view. That statement told everybody something simple. The department had lost political cover. 2 days later, Miller was suspended. A week after that, he was terminated. The official grounds were broad enough to hold up and specific enough to destroy him. Conduct unbecoming, unlawful detention, failure to follow identification and verification procedure, discriminatory conduct, false and misleading reporting, violation of department de-escalation policy. Once dishonesty went on the record, his chances of working serious law enforcement again dropped through the floor. Then the state certification board opened decertification proceedings. That was the real end. A fired officer can sometimes bounce around. A decertified one usually can't. Not in any serious agency that wants to survive public records requests. The civil lawsuit landed right after. Judge Ellison's legal team didn't file something flashy. They filed something disciplined: federal civil rights claims, unlawful seizure, equal protection violations, municipal liability arguments tied to prior notice and failure to act on complaint history, negligent retention, public humiliation damages, preservation demands for every piece of footage, radio traffic, dispatch record, supervisory message, and complaint file touching Miller's history. It was the kind of lawsuit that doesn't just ask for money. It asks who knew what, when they knew it, and why they kept the wrong man on the street. The city tried the usual early posture: regret without admission, respect for the process, quiet talk about resolution. But the facts were awful and everybody knew it. The judge hadn't mouthed off. He hadn't resisted. He hadn't been hard to identify. The crowd had done half the officer's job for him, and Miller still forced the outcome he wanted. A jury would have seen that in about 10 minutes. So the city settled. The number got attention, but the non-monetary terms hit harder. Mandatory outside review of high complaint officers, tighter preservation rules for body cam and event footage, new requirements for identity verification before physical detention in non-violent encounters, expanded bias review triggers, better supervisor intervention standards, mandatory psychological screening after repeated escalation complaints. Not because politicians suddenly became moral heroes, because the footage made denial too expensive. Judge Ellison pushed further after the settlement. He worked with state lawmakers, bar associations, and judicial committees on a package of accountability reforms. Nothing dramatic. No speech-making nonsense. Just practical fixes. Stronger complaint pattern review. Faster flags for officers who repeatedly escalate low-level encounters. Clearer decertification standards where misconduct and dishonesty overlap. more serious training on constitutional stops, bias recognition, and public-facing restraint. Boring to some people, effective in real life. That's how real change usually looks. Not loud, structural. As for Miller, his name became the example nobody wanted attached to a department. His firing stayed public. The certification action moved forward. His report-writing credibility was gone. Prosecutors didn't want him. Agencies didn't want him. City lawyers definitely didn't want him. He'd walked into that gala thinking a badge made him the final authority in any space he entered. A few minutes of ego proved the opposite. In a modern system with cameras, records, and people willing to fight, authority without judgment doesn't protect a man. It exposes him. Judge Ellison went back to work. That part matters. He didn't let the incident become his identity. He stayed on the bench. He kept his dignity. He turned one officer's public failure into a case study on discipline, oversight, and what happens when somebody calm knows the law better than the man trying to control him. And that's really the story. Not that Miller didn't know who he was grabbing, that was the beginning. The real problem was that he thought it wouldn't matter. He thought he could force first, explain later, and the system would stretch around him like it always had. That night, it didn't. So what would you have done if you were standing there, watching it happen in real time? Have you ever seen somebody with authority push too far? Because they assumed nobody would challenge them? Put it in the comments. Share the story with somebody who still thinks professionalism in policing is optional. And subscribe for more stories about power, accountability, and the exact moment arrogant people realize the room is turned on them.